Lately it looks like America's been having an anger problem, and all too many of us now have the urge to use name calling, like violent social media posts, threats, baseball bats, and guns to do what we once did with persuasion and voting. Now, take this for example. After Trump started squatting in the White House, threats of violence and even death threats against lawmakers of both parties increased more than fourfold. And all too often, the call to violence seems to come from the top. Recently, defendants in cases involving extremist violence have claimed that the elected leader or pundit told them to do so. Like Trump told his sycophants to basically attack anybody that didn't agree with their political view. In a country where a sitting president or squatter would lunge at his own security detail in rage, I guess this isn't too fucking surprising anymore. Emotion rules the American political scene, and so many now tend to shoot from the hip without even knowing why. And increasing numbers of us, however, respond to the growing extremity of the moment by avoiding the latest headlines and civic engagement. And we're fearful that some trauma will befall us even by witnessing the news. Um, now, Andrea Mazzarino is she's a psychotherapist who works with veterans and military families, and she often speaks with folks who have decided to limit their news intake or they've stopped following the news altogether because news, as you know, with the news can be depressing. Repeated mass shootings in places ranging from schools to houses of worship, combined with increased visibility and influence of militias at theoretically peaceful demonstrations, can be more scarring than the wounds that soldiers once sustained in combat zones. And I must admit, um, that even when it comes to family and everything else, that they sometimes practice a similar form of political avoidance. Now, recently, we considered she took, her two young children to the March for Our Lives gun control event on the National Mall in Washington. However, um, however, her spouse, an active duty service member, urged her to reconsider. If extremists showed up, it might prove difficult for her to be alone to get our children out of danger. And I thought better of it, and I stayed home. That's what she did. So in a country where a Republican senatorial candidate can run an ad featuring themselves with an armed military tactical unit on a residential street, urging Americans to hunt what they refer to as rhinos, which means Republicans in name only, are those who criticize Trump without widespread censorship from their party. I believe that my family's fears are well founded. Now the question is, what if something happens at a protest? It would never have occurred to either a spouse or to anybody that's married when we first met more than a decade ago. Now, as a human rights activist who spent years working in she spent years working in Vladimir Putin's Russia, and we can say that I'm now I'm now more afraid of the hair trigger responses from the Republicans than I was of that Kremlin strongman's far more carefully targeted violence. I guess the memory of the January 6th Capitol Klan insurrection, coup attempt, or any description of your choice by a mob of angry Trump sycophants still weighs heavily on everyone. Um, these days, it's the mundane stuff like Republican Party meetings that contain the details that we do well to notice. Such such proceedings reveal a new level of combativeness as party leaders they attempt to shape state and local laws and policies to their ever less democratic desires. Now, for instance, Politico recently obtained recordings of the Republican National Committee operatives training thousands of volunteer poll watchers to disrupt future elections in Democratic districts of swing states like Michigan by actively changing the eligibility of voters. Now, the RNC and its affiliates are linking those poll watchers to hotlines and websites that list party-friendly lawyers, the police officers and district attorneys who might be ready to stage real-time interventions during the voting and vote counts. For example, district attorneys recruited by the right-wing organization called the Amistad Project will be able to start investigations and issue subpoenas ever more quickly. Now, of course, the RNC initiative at the polls is rooted in the baseless claim that the 2020 election was stolen from former squatter Donald Trump, when in reality it wasn't. But that committee's identification with such a lie should instantly debunk any idea that such would-be poll watchers would act fairly. The very roles of the poll watcher and poll challenger are supposed to be legally different, with only the poll challengers authorized to interfere in the voting process in most states, including Michigan, and then only based on facts. And yet, we're clearly in a world where Republican leaders have begun to treat our polls as war zones. In the spirit of this moment, an RNC election integrity officer from Michigan, Matthew Seafried, described his future poll volunteers and the public officials supporting them this way. It's going to be an army. He added that this party is going to have more lawyers than we've ever recruited, because let's be honest, that's where it's going to be fought, right? Seafried and his Michigan colleagues are anything but alone in their combative rhetoric, and such militarized language and imagery are now all too regularly a part of our political DNA. Now, just recently, the Texas Republican Party released a statement refusing to recognize the legitimacy of Joe Biden's 2020 rightful election victory, and all too typically, it's also called for that state's Republicans to go on offense and win the fight for our country. I would never live in Texas anyway; they're too inbred for me. In Texas and beyond, individuals expressing such anger and sometimes a vision of a future with the white ethno state as well are gaining elected official. Surprising numbers of Republican candidates and public officials, they share the view that the 2020 election was stolen all too regularly, and it also echoes the white racist great replacement theory. Now, meanwhile, across the country, multiple electoral bills are being considered by the Republican-controlled state legislators that would, in the future, enable them to overturn elections, which isn't right anyway, and it's not fair for that. According to the International Center for the Not-for-Profit Law, the 45 state legislators have considered 230 bills that would criminalize the threat of violent leftist or black protest, and sadly enough, the far-right activists are anything but a fringe minority movement as they challenge the very idea of peaceful elections and public protests that aren't theirs. Now, to be sure, the democratic violence and combative rhetoric is a thing in this country, but it's a small one. The shooting of a Trump sycophant by an Antifa protester in Portland, Oregon, during a Black Lives Matter demonstration in August of 2020, is the only known example of a lethal attack by that Democratic wing group or other anti-fascists over the past 25 years. Of the 450 murders by political extremists during the last 20 years, if not more, approximately 4% of them were committed by Democrats, and the other 80 and the other 75 plus were committed by the Republicans, like white supremacist anti-government ones. In the own extended family of parents, siblings, aunts, and uncles, most of whom support Trump, about half of them have stopped speaking to me, while some have called me a weak and a coward on social media because of the ideas I discuss in essays like this, where we've openly criticized the government and its military. Of note, my immediate military family and friends accept their differences far more gracefully. So what are we to do? To start off, given where the Trumpist movement and much of the Republican Party seems to be heading, we really fucking need to do something, and not just something, but anything. As Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benton, a Democrat, pointed out, facing the growing crisis on the right, I've seen no significant increase in support from national political parties than what we experienced back in 2018, when the party vigilante was significantly enough, but not nearly enough to do what was needed. A headline of an article in the satirical online newspaper The Onion, which is something I don't even read, but that it caught the mood of the moment among progressives. A Democratic group too disorganized for FBI agents to infiltrate. In it, a fictional FBI agent says these people don't ever do anything violent. They don't ever do anything at all. Now, recently, a local Democratic candidate in Maryland knocked on Amanda's door, seeking her name and contact information as a possible volunteer for his campaign. It turned out, however, he wasn't even carrying a pen or a paper, but it seemed to capture the problem that we often note in progressive activism these days. Basically, she gave him a couple of her first graders overdue library slips to write on, and a marker that she had lying around. And it's sadly true that Democrats and progressives they more generally lack a concentrated response to the right wing and anger and violence, basically. Ironically, one government institution that has at least made a nod toward countering the Republican violence is the military. Since the January 6th Klan attacks, the Department of Defense Undersecretary of Defense Lloyd Austin it has acknowledged an increase in the domestic violence, but it's carried out by active duty or reserve service members. In response, he initiated a multi-pronged strategy to screen new results, um, like new recruits, educate military personnel about extremism, and begin investigating extremist activity within the ranks. Now we've encountered our share of bigoted remarks and over the years, where she had served, like her husband basically being an basically she's also met far more people in those military communities than in civilian ones, and they're willing to form friendships with those of different ideological leanings. When you depend on one another for companionship and even survival at home or abroad, you can't be too choosy about the beliefs of your companions. Now, as partisan rhetoric heats up in this country, I'd have to say progressives are too guilty of focusing too hard on the most politicized identity issues, however valuable, or even whatever asinine behavior ignites our airwaves at any given moment. Whether it be Trump's QAnon-style conspiracy mongering, or ex New York Governor Andrew Cuomo's groping. The problem is that as the Trumpists ramp up their anger, and progressives don't find a unifying message of community and love and find it soon, the guns are already out there, maybe put to use in unspeakable ways. Now progressives would do well to step back and think about the genuine big tent issues, like how to show everyone from white suburban women to rural farmers to black single parents that they have so much to lose in their life if we don't have a government willing to continue regulated healthcare, and doing so in a far better fashion. They would gain so much if, in this all too angry country of ours, they could refocus our attention on the importance of childcare for every family who needs it. Now, above all, if they could focus in an intense way on their ever more dangerous world that we're living in, that would be a positive. Whether or not we agree on what's causing global warming, it's hard not to agree right now that we're living in an even hotter, even more drought-stricken, ever more extreme America. Who can't agree that it's already damn hot and the summer is just beginning? Um, Something needs to be fucking done, and soon. And to mitigate the effects of the climate change, no political campaign has yet emerged that captures the urgency and extremity. And for once, I'm not thinking about the squatter Donald Trump of this moment, but most immediately, those of us who favor democracy and a better planet would do well to support the criminal prosecution of the former squatter Trump, because if he becomes this country's leader again, we could find ourselves in trouble too deep to ever get out of. And yes, on so many issues, many of us may not agree with Representative Liz Cheney, the Republican on the House committee, um, investigating the January 6th Klan attacks, or even former Vice Squatter Mike Pence, who had risked his own life and his family to certify Joe Biden's rightful victory. But I do agree with Representative Jamie Raskin that they're among the Republican heroes of this Trumpian moment, who are few and far between. As the Russian novelist and historian Alexander Solzhenitsyn, I'm not sure if I'm saying this name right. It's Alexander is his first name. Solzhenitsyn once wrote. See, I might have mispronounced that name. The line separating good and evil passes right through the human heart. Occupying the hearts of many Americans, however, is Donald Trump, a damaged man who personifies our basest instincts. He needs to be identified forcefully by leaders of all stripes as the threat to the democracy that he is. Hurry up, Attorney General Merrick Garland, and bring charges against him. Meanwhile, we should all seek opportunities to find common ground among ideological opposites. Invite over a neighbor for dinner, even though you know he listens to conservative radio on his way to work. Help another family with childcare, even though the political signs on their lawn aren't ones you agree with. Just try to avoid the angry armed ones, or have them check their guns at the door. They're the ones who need to change their tactics. Otherwise, judging by the fight of tens of thousands of highly skilled Russian professionals from Vladimir Putin's warmongering regime, I'm sure he has a few job openings for them. If only their hatred had no place here. It's time to be less angry and far more focused on what we need to have done. So if you like the video, give the video a like and subscribe to my channel, REW King. You can also hit the notification bell so that you'll be notified when a new video comes out. And if you want to support my work even further, you can donate to my Patreon link, which you can find in the About section of YouTube. And for just as little as a few bucks a month, your donation can help go a long way, and thanks for listening.